And welcome to this edition of the MLB Talk 101. My name is Gershon Rabinowitz, and we have a very special guest 1 week from opening day in the United States. He's the voice of the Miami Marlins. You've heard him on Major League Baseball on Fox. You possibly have heard him on College Hoops and many other jobs. Rich Waltz joins us. And Rich, it's a pleasure to have you on this show. How is everything?
It's good, and you're right. It's almost a week to the minute that the Marlins season will open at Marlins Park, and it's been quite a night. I think just being around training camp and watching spring training and seeing the team, and there's a totally different vibe around the ball club in 2014 than there was at this time in 2013. I think everybody from players to coaches to managers to broadcasters, even fans have said the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, last year was a very difficult season. There were a lot of moves that the Marlins made that people were skeptical about. And Marlins only won 62 games last year. This year they brought in some veterans. They made some different moves. Players are a year older. And we'll see what happens with it. So let's begin with your career a little bit first. You grew up in Northern California, three-sport athlete, attended the University of California, Davis. But given your athletic background, how did you end up in broadcasting?
Well, I ended up in broadcasting because they wouldn't let me play baseball anymore. I played college baseball at the University of California, Davis. I was a pretty good college player, but at that time there were no independent leagues. So if you didn't get drafted, you couldn't play anymore. And so I didn't get drafted, and I had to decide between law school and doing something else. I was pre-law, and I had a burning desire to get to the big leagues, and so there was a student radio station, and I decided, well, look, I mean, maybe I could be a broadcaster. And I was just stupid enough to think that I could do that, and never really realized the long odds of getting there. And did a little bit of stuff on the student station, and was able to get a job in broadcasting doing minor league hockey, which was a long ways away from Major League Baseball. But it got me started, and it I was in Spokane, Washington, and I worked my way through the minor leagues in baseball as well, with stops in Spokane, Wichita, and Las Vegas. Got on regional sports television doing games that nobody wanted to do, women's basketball, college tennis, and then worked my way into doing some college football, and ESPN hired me. I was at ESPN for 6 years while I was doing stuff for the Seattle Mariners. I was kind of their utility guy. Filling in on play-by-play and doing pregame shows on TV. And then I was at ESPN at the time doing college football and college basketball and Major League Baseball. And then wanted to be the number one guy in baseball, and was able to get the Marlins job 10 years ago.
And it's interesting you mentioned about calling college hockey. I mean, hockey to me is in my opinion, the most difficult sport to call because just the frantic pace of the game and the terminology and everything that goes in it. Not saying that baseball is not a difficult sport to call as well. Were you a hockey fan? Did you know anything about the sport? Or you're just going in just basically blank, trying, never calling a game in your life, and you're starting to call college hockey?
Well, truth be told, when I was able to get a little bit of football and basketball tape from the student station, and I called everywhere looking for a football and basketball job, and I was, naive to the fact that most voices of colleges had been there for 20, 30 years, and found out pretty quickly after about 50 phone calls that nobody needed a play-by-play announcer. Found someone that needed a hockey announcer, and it was the Western Hockey League, the Spokane Chiefs, and the gentleman that had the rights asked me if I could do hockey, and I said, yeah, I could. And I sent my 2 minutes of football and basketball up there, and he was intrigued. He said, there's no hockey on the tape. And I said, well, it's because, there's no hockey here. But I know hockey. I love hockey. I started throwing out hockey names and stuff. And for some reason, he liked me and he hired me. And I had never seen a hockey game in my life live. I'd watched hockey. I watched, Peter Puck and the old NHL package and all that. And was able to, in 3 weeks' time, learn enough about the sport, listen to a lot of it on tape, on radio, and study it. And by the time the season started, I was able to do it. And you're right, it's hard, but it was perfect for me because that was my graduate school. That was that's how I learned how to be a broadcaster, and I got thrown in the deep end right away.
And you were with the Seattle Mariners, as you mentioned, I would say about a decade or close to a
Yep.
decade. And Kurt Smith, in his book, he wrote a book that was called Talk in the Park, where he interviewed a lot of different baseball broadcasters. We got a lot of interesting stories about you and your relationship with Lou Piniella. Describe for us your relationship with Piniella, and what was it like covering that 1995 club Refused to Lose and everything that went on in Seattle?
It was incredible. First of all, the '95 team was just an incredible ride, and getting to fill in and do some games during that season was special. My relationship with Piniella is something that it will always be special for me. The first time my first job in Major League Baseball was 1993, and I was the weekend post-game host on radio, and so you're essentially hosting call-in shows and angry callers and all that. And they weren't that good in '93. And so I went to the ballpark. Before I'd even gone on the air, I went to the ballpark just to sit and watch some games. Kevin Kremen, who's still there, he's their producer. The regular guy was sick. And so Kevin turned to me and said, "Hey, can you get Lou tonight for the post-game show? Because the regular guy's sick." And I'm like, "Okay, cool." And he hands me a tape recorder and a microphone. And he says, "Just, in the post-game news conference, you get Lou, and then bring it back up here." So I thought he meant interview Lou. So the game ends, and Bobby Ayala blew another save, and Lou's angry. And so I found my way into his office, and there, sitting in his office, is probably 15 or 20 writers, and they're deadly silent. And Lou is about 10 feet away, sitting behind his desk, and he's smoking a cigarette, drinking a beer, eating a piece of pizza, all at the same time, and just angry. He's got those dark crow eyes, and he's boiling. And so I'm sitting there. I look at the writers, and I look at Lou, and I think to myself, nobody's talking here. Why is no one talking? And then I realized, well, that's because they're waiting for me to get Lou on the postgame show. So I walked up to his desk, and he looks at me like I'm from Mars. I turned the tape thing on, and I said, "Skip, really tough loss tonight to the Tigers," and I stuck the microphone out. And he started answering. He started, "Oh, yeah, it's a terrible loss, and we got to do something." And he just went on this minute and a half rant about, how bad the bullpen was, and unless they got some relievers in. And he stops, and there's silence, and I'm looking at everybody, and everyone's looking at me like, what are you doing? And so I asked the second question. I said, Buhner had a couple hits tonight. And Lou he looks at me and he goes, yeah, he did. And then he gets up and he starts walking around. He's got his underwear on. He's got his sleeves on and long john underwear. And he starts waving his arms around, and he's going off. And then he stops and he looks at me and he goes, "Son, what the hell are you doing?" And I said, "Well, and he goes, he got so worked up that he just looked at the writers and he goes, "All of you, get the hell out of here." And he threw us all out. And so I took and this was my first day on the job. So I took the tape deck and I took the microphone back up to the press box, and they're in the post-game show, and Kevin took his headphones off. He said, "How did it go?" And I said, he was really angry, but here's the interview. And he said, is it usable? I said, the first question is usable, his first answers. But I said, don't take the second one, because he starts to cuss. And he goes, "What do you mean the second one?" And I said, "Well, I asked him the first question, then I asked him the second question, and he got really mad." And Kevin said, "Well, you're not supposed to ask him questions. You're supposed to just record what he says to the writers." And so I said, "Oh, okay." And I walked out of the building figuring I'd lose my job. I figured I'd be fired. And as it turns out, I didn't get fired. And Lou got over it. But the funny thing was, the next year, I got the job as the pregame television voice. Mm-hmm. And to do that, one of the things you had to do was host the Lou Piniella show. So Lou hadn't seen me since then, and he had forgotten about it. And so we're all set up. It's a big deal. It's the first cable package for the Mariners. and this is their first pregame show, and so we're all, got the set ready. Lou's coming over. They're paying Lou to do this, everything. Well, they had lost the game, another bad bullpen night the night before, and Lou goes and he's meeting with the writers before he comes over to meet with us, and we're all set up, and I'm a little nervous. This is my first Lou Piniella show on TV, and all of a sudden Lou comes away from the pack, and you can tell he's angry. He's got his face is red, smoke coming out of his ears, and he sits down next to me, and he's just cussing and MFing the writers, and these damn writers, all they want to talk about is the bullpen, and I can't, I tell the GM I need more relievers, I need different arms, and they just pound me about the bullpen. I'm so bleeping tired about talking about the bleeping bullpen, blah, blah, blah. And he stops, and I looked at him, and I said, Skip, I won't ask you about the bullpen. And a great calm came over him, and he kind of put his arm around me, and he said, son, I appreciate that. Let's go. So I asked the first question. I said, well, another tough loss to the White Sox last night. You got a hot hitter in Edgar Martinez, though. He was 3 for 4 last night. And Lou goes something along the lines of, yeah, Edgar's a professional hitter, and he's all that, and he's hot. But you know what? He said, our bullpen's terrible. And he spent 3 minutes ranting on his bullpen. And after I told him I wouldn't ask him about his bullpen, he just launched into it himself, and then he finished. And I said, Lou, thanks for the visit. And he goes, all right, you're welcome. And that was the first Lou Piniella show.
Wow, I mean, that is quite a story. Just Piniella ranting and doing all that.
I'll finish it with this, though. He left for Tampa Bay. He and the ball club weren't getting along. He went back to manage the Rays. And he had not come back to Seattle yet. He was on his way to Seattle with the Rays. And the network, Fox Northwest, sent me to Oakland before they got to Seattle to do like a 10-minute sit-down interview with Lou, his first interview as a Rays manager before he got to Seattle. And he saw me and came over and was really happy to see me because we had done now, I think, 8 or 9 seasons of these shows together, and he said, yeah, I'll come on over, and he comes over to sit down, and I think people have this vision of Lou Piniella as this fiery base-throwing maniac, which he is, but he also is a very emotional guy. He could not get through the 10 minutes without breaking down many times. It was to see that and see the emotions that he had was really something. And we had come full circle at that point. And he's a terrific guy. He's a terrific manager. I think obviously the Mariners miss him. They haven't done a whole lot since he left, and I think baseball misses him as well.
Well, definitely. And then by 1997, I mean, you joined ESPN. You were calling many different sports. I think you did some baseball regionally. Yep. You did some college football with Gino Torretta, who was a Heisman winner. You saw the likes of Eli Manning, Tom Brady, Randy Moss, Chad Pennington play in their college years. I found a lot of those clips on YouTube. How did you end up at ESPN? And do you ever think back when you see these guys and play in the NFL or play Major League Baseball, when you saw these guys play in the minors, do you ever think about that you saw them play?
The ESPN thing happened when I was doing regional television in Seattle. I had just started my Mariner stuff and was able to work into the Pac-10 conference and the Big Sky conference. And ESPN saw me and hired me. And for 6 years I did a lot of great college football games in the Big Ten. Rod Gilmore was my first partner. Gino Torretta, Don McPherson. I had a great time and saw some great football, from the SEC to the ACC to the Big Ten, college basketball as well, and then Major League Baseball. And yeah, you do. It's interesting to see a guy like Pennington now as a broadcaster, because when I did the MAC championship game, I think I did 3 of those. He was at Marshall, and we interviewed him before the game, and he said, well, I really want to do what you guys are doing as a broadcaster, but if I'm lucky enough to make it in the NFL, then I'll do that. And he's done both. He had a nice career. His career was cut short by his shoulder injury, and now he's a really good broadcaster. But yeah, you see those guys, and now in the game, many of them actually retired and such. But you think about it, there were guys from that Spokane Chiefs hockey team that had great NHL careers. Ray Whitney, Pat Falloon, Brent Gilchrist, Mick Fakota, Tony Horacek, Steve Junker. There was a lot of guys from that team, and in that Western Hockey League was just filled with NHL All-Stars as well.
And you might have called the final college football game or the final sporting event of the 20th century when you called the Independence Bowl.
I did. I did. That was a weird night because, as you remember back then, with that change, people were afraid that computers would crash and the world would come to a screeching halt. And we were in Shreveport with Gino and Donnie McPherson, and we called the game. I don't even remember who was playing. And you know what? The funny thing was we were all at the 50-yard line when the clock struck midnight, and we took this big group picture figuring we're either all going to die or this is going to be a great party. And it turned out to be a good party. So.
Yeah. And you were actually up for the Marlins job a couple of years before you got it. Dave O'Brien, who was the Marlins announcer, went to WPIX in New York and worked with Tom Seaver. And you were the runner-up to your good friend Len Casper, who ended up getting the job. Did you believe at the time that that was going to be your only opportunity to get a full-time play-by-play job in the big leagues?
No, the irony of that year was there were 3 jobs open that I applied for, the Marlins job, and there were 2 other big league jobs. And in all 3 of those jobs, I finished second, which you could take 2 ways. You could take it that, I can't believe I finished second 3 times, or you can take the tact of, well, I must be doing something right to get this close. And that's essentially what the executives in all 3 places told me was, look, you very easily could have had this job. And as it turned out, Lenny got the opportunity in Chicago, and the Fox Florida people quickly called me and said, hey, we want you to reapply, and that's how I got the job.
And your partner since then has been Tommy Hutton. The 2 of you have terrific chemistry on air. What have you learned from working with Tommy, and how long did it take to develop the chemistry with him in the booth?
Chemistry was very quick to develop. Tommy, we're not cut of the same cloth, but we're close. We're both from California. Tommy actually went to the same high school as my father and grew up in the same hometown, Pasadena, as my dad. The first thing I learned from Tommy was how to be the voice of a team. Because I had been a network guy, whether it was doing small college football or regional football or then ESPN football or ABC games. You were always a network guy, but now you're the voice of the team, and that's different. And Tommy taught me very quickly, not by sitting me down and lecturing me, but just by listening to him, that, and this is our style, it's different than a lot of other people in the major leagues. You certainly have more passion for the team that you're calling. You're enthusiastic when they score, but at the same time, you don't shy away from criticism, and you don't ignore the other team. You give the other team as much respect as you would on a national show. And I think we do that every night. We know as much about the Phillies as I think any visiting broadcasters do. We know as much about the Cleveland Indians when we do the Indians as we did last year. We make it a point to go down and talk to visiting managers, visiting pitching coaches, players, and stuff like that. That's what I learned from Tommy, and how to balance the passion for the team that you're calling, as well as calling it fairly and doing justice to the opponent as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who just watch the games casually do not realize just the effect that you have just calling a game and what goes into, just doing not just play-by-play, but just you have to interview everybody and talk to every single person, scouts, and just get an idea of both teams and what goes on. And Tommy actually came, I think, from a national background too. I think he did some national games for ESPN with Chris Berman. So I guess that was a pretty similar connection there. And as you mentioned, a very unique style you guys have. You're not afraid to criticize teams. You're not afraid to get on your team, knowledgeable about both teams as well. But also, a lot of times you even have like some things that endear you to the hometown fans, and maybe even some around the country. Just different nicknames and different things, like Donnie Bleep and Murphy for Donnie Murphy when he's done some things. Uncle Wes with Wes Helms. And the one I think a lot of people know about, and I think a lot of Marlins fans wonder about this, Dan Uggla, your famous call, the home run call. Every time he hit a home run would be, his name is Dan Uggla. Where did that come from?
It came from a couple places. Uggla came with that raft of unknowns in 2006. The Mike Jacobs, the Josh Willinghams, guys that people really hadn't heard a whole lot about. They had dismantled the World Series team from '03, but they waited till after the '05 season. They kept that team together for 2 more seasons. Uggla arrives. The first thing that happened was we were at a team dinner, and these guys had just arrived. It was before spring training, and Tommy and I were given a list of names, and we didn't know any of these guys either. And Uggla's name was misspelled on the list. So when we announced his name, it was misspelled. And as he walked by the podium, he turned up and he said, "My name is Dan Uggla." And nobody could hear that. It was just, we heard it. And so it was like, and afterwards we showed Dan the list and said, "Hey, Dan, we're sorry, but this is what we got." He goes, "Look, I'm just happy to be in the big leagues." So Uggla starts the season. He wins the second base job because who was the second baseman that went AWOL? Pokey Reese, I think, was in camp, and Pokey disappeared mysteriously. And so Uggla ends up winning the job. And you get to late April and early May, and all of a sudden Uggla's hitting home runs, and big home runs. Month of April, Tommy and I spent the whole month correcting everybody. How do you pronounce this guy's name? His name is Uggla. PA his name and visiting ballparks. Uggla, but they couldn't get it right. And so we'd always walk in between innings, "Look, his name is Dan Uggla." And so we got tired of it because he was starting to hit home runs, and then on Sports Center and the highlight shows, no one could get his name right. So one night he hits a big home run, like a 3-run shot to put him up late in a ball game, and I just blurted out, and his name is Dan Uggla. So it's sort of like when Eddie Murphy screamed, "I am Gumby, damn it," on Saturday Night Live. That was that moment where, look, his name's Dan Uggla, damn it. And I didn't say damn it, but and it just popped out, and it fit. And like two nights later, he hit another home run in a big moment. And after he hit it, Tommy goes, "And his name is," and he looked at me like, "So?" And I yelled out, "Dan Uggla." So that became, and we used it on significant home runs. If it was 7-0 and he hits a solo shot, we wouldn't use it because we saved it for significant home runs. Either Marlins were ahead or it was a significant home run, and we kept the call. We just kept it. Fans liked it. It was unique. I've never had a signature call for anything. But for that, we kept it, and it kind of grew legs, and Uggla liked it himself, so that's why we kept it.
Yeah, I mean, that became something really special. I think the first time that I heard it was, on SportsCenter, because it kept getting played on ESPN, and I think it was the walk-off grand slam that he hit in '08 against Tom Gordon. And it was that one. That one got played. It ended up actually in MLB The Show also. And I also remember, I think, one variation of it when the Marlins played in Puerto Rico was last year, and he hit the home run against the Mets, and you guys said, "Siyama Dan Uggla."
Yes, we talked about that. I said, well, what if Uggla hits a home run here in Puerto Rico? And so we made sure we had the correct, verb and tense and all that, and we ripped it. And Uggla, sure enough, Uggla hit one, and we dropped that on there. So, but it was fun. It was. It's something that was spontaneous, and it had its roots in Uggla, an underdog. Nobody knew his name. You know what? You better learn his name because he's now an all-star and he's now a great player.
Back to the current Marlins team, they're entering their 3rd season playing in the old Orange Bowl site by Little Havana, Marlins Park. The organization underwent a massive rebranding in 2012. They spent $190 million on free agency, bring in Heath Bell and Jose Reyes, Mark Burley. The club only won 69 games that year. They struggled. They purged the club, made that infamous trade. that a lot of people were against, that brought in Jake Marisnick and a lot of these young players, and it turned out to be the right move in retrospect. And then last year they hired Mike Redmond. They began to pick up the pieces, won 7 fewer games than the year before. What encouraging signs, despite a rough year last year, did you see from the Marlins on the field that could help set the tone for this season?
Well, I think the young pitching. Obviously, Fernandez being the rookie of the year, um, Henderson Alvarez finishing with a no-hitter, Nathan Eovaldi starting to find his strike, Jacob Turner turning his season around a bit at the end, showing signs of why the Tigers made him such a top draft pick. And then, Yelich coming up, and, Marisnick, Ozuna. So you saw pieces. And I was just doing the numbers the other day. The Marlins were, I want to say, 14-41 in April and May last year. And then when they got everybody healthy, the two pitchers came back up. Stanton got healthy. From that point on, I think they were only like 15 games under. So you saw the encouraging signs. And you're right. Last year was a really bitterly painful year for fans, just because of the drop in payroll and the way I think 2012 went down. So this year, you turn the page, and in training camp, everybody's a year older. The pitchers are all healthy, and there's more pitching on the way. Kohler looks good in camp. Brad Hand has looked good in camp. They have depth in the rotation, and their next wave of youngsters are just about major league ready right now. There was one scout that said that the Marlins have 7 to 8 guys that belong in a major league rotation right now, which is, that's the gold currency in baseball right now. The most encouraging sign that I've seen in spring training is the smile on Giancarlo Stanton's face, because he was a real disgruntled cowboy, so to speak, last year. And you can understand why. Young player, rug pulled out from under him. But this year, for whatever reason, he's energized. He's taken ownership of the team. He's into it. He should have some more protection with hopefully a Salt Lamacchia, a Garrett Jones, a Casey McGee help. Yelich, another year older, another year better. So those are the encouraging things that you see moving into this year's camp.
And we have this question. This is from Twitter, from mfeed4. He asks, how much stock do you take in performances in spring training, like from guys like Tom Kohler, Brad Hand, or any of the youngsters from the minor leagues?
It's different for each player, because I take stock in a guy like Kohler or Hand's performance because they're competing for jobs. And they're different than, say, a Salt Lamacchia or a Furcal or a Stanton or a veteran player that has a job and knows they're on the team and is working on things. There are pitchers that will go out and throw 1 or 2 specific pitches just to get the feel of the pitch, regardless if a guy hits it 400 feet or pops it up. There are hitters that will go out and look certain zones and look certain pitches just to get their eye and get their timing. But when you're a Donovan Solano or a Derek Dietrich, who are both having great camps, you're competing for a job. There's no, I'm working on this or I'm working on that. It's, I need results. If you're Kohler, if you're Hand, I need results. If you're Jose Fernandez, you're trying to get the feel of your slider. You're working on your changeup. You're trying to stay within your mechanics and all of that. So I think it's a good question. I think it depends on the player and that player's situation.
Most revealing sign last year for the futility of the club was the offense. It tied the 2010 Seattle Mariners for the fewest runs scored in the history of baseball.
That's right. And
Tino Martinez, the hitting instructor, was fired midway through the season. Was there anything specific that you noticed watching the team on a daily basis that led to their struggles offensively?
No, they just weren't any good. It's that simple. You had young players that were probably there a year too soon. Mm-hmm. You just didn't have guys, and you had Stanton, who was out of the lineup a lot in April and May. When you're hoping that Nick Green and Donovan Solano run into a few to get you some runs, you're in trouble. They just weren't any good. That's quite honest. They were historically bad. Batting average, slugging percentage, on base percentage, lack of home runs from third base, first base, which are power spots. Morrison really struggled. And it was that simple. And that's why they went and addressed third base, first base, catcher, and did it in a way. They didn't sign the big mega stars, solid guys, but I think the important thing is they didn't give up any pitching when they did that.
Yeah. And how much can those veterans that you mentioned about, like Jared Salamakia, they brought in Garrett Jones, Rafael Furcal, Casey McGee, and Carlos Marmo for the bullpen, what type of influence can they have on this young ball club, both on and off the field?
Well, off the field, I think a lot, because the thread with all of those guys, and I don't know enough about Marmol, but I've been told Marmol's a pretty good guy in the clubhouse. But Saltalamacchia, especially McGee, Jones, Baker, are all known as good clubhouse guys. Now, the fact that they're in the lineup every day makes a big difference, because you can have good clubhouse guys, but if they're not playing, they're not making as big an impact. You're obviously taking a gamble that McGee can revert back to, the year or two that he had with the Brewers where he was good, and the year he had last year in Japan. You're hoping that Jones hits 20 home runs, and he's probably not going to play against lefties. So if he hits 20 home runs, which has been his history, you'll take it after getting maybe 4 or 5 or whatever it was out of first base last year. And Saltalamacchia, who I think he had over 40 doubles last year, is in a ballpark that screams doubles. Any offense you get from those three positions helps you compared to last year. So I think obviously you want them to have an impact on the field. That's the most important thing. But if they have an impact on the field, that'll help them have an impact in the clubhouse as well.
And Jared Salamakia is coming from a World Series winner. I mean, he played for the Red Sox last couple of years, came up in the Braves system, which is known for winning, so that will be a plus for them. And the Marlins' strength, as you mentioned about, is pitching. They were led by Jose Fernandez, Henderson Alvarez, the latter of whom tossed a walk-off no-hitter on the last day of the season, which is something that, you'll never see. You'll hardly ever see.
Back at Fox, we're asking the people in the booth, when's the last time this happened? And I think they found it like in the 40s or the 30s or something to that effect, long before Kirk Gibson coined the phrase walk-off, whatever. So, yeah, no one's ever seen that. It's like no one's ever called that. So I can remember thinking, all right, what's this going to sound like if he gets the no-hitter and he's sitting on the bench? And as luck would have it, he ends up on deck. So at least he's on deck. And our director, Jim Hawley, our producer, John Sulzer, did a really nice job on that telecast. We actually won an Emmy last year for our coverage, Marlins baseball, and that was a great example. They did a really nice job of putting Alvarez in a box in the corner, following him, both in the dugout and on deck in that bottom of the ninth inning when the Marlins got the bases loaded and then finally got the run. And so you're thinking to yourself, all right, what's it going to sound like if he gets the no-hitter? Because I've called no-hitters in perfect games, and that's easy to do. You just get out of its way, and it's a perfect game where he's got the no-hitter. But, how do you make it? And it turned out it was great. It was a wild pitch. The run came racing home, and Alvarez came racing to the plate at the same time. So it all worked out amazingly.
It's amazing with the way the technology is today that people can go on Twitter on a day when everybody's watching football and doing other things on a Sunday, and then they see there's a no-hitter going on in baseball, and they're all captivated, getting to a screen, getting to MLB Network, and just watching that. That was something that really amazed me, because I know a lot of times on Sundays I'm going to be watching football, and then all of a sudden I see that pop up, and that was pretty crazy. Some say Nathan Eovaldi, Jacob Turner has much upside, both of them as the other starters. What can we expect as a whole from the starting rotation this season, and how will the Marlins manage to keep these pitchers fresh without overworking them? Because we've seen a lot of pitchers get Tommy John surgery and elbow trouble and shoulder problems over the last couple of weeks.
It's a good question, and I think if you asked 30 general managers and 30 managers in baseball, you'd get a different answer. Even the guys that have been babied and coddled and treated with white gloves, the Steven Strasburgs, the Patrick Corbins, guys like that are getting hurt and undergoing these surgeries. Now you're getting guys into their second surgeries. So I don't know that there's an answer. In the one thing that the Marlins are going to do differently this year is they're going to gauge at the major league level and the minor league level stressful innings. So instead of just, hey, he threw 110 pitches, it's going to be he had a 30-pitch inning where, he had runners on, and how many stressful innings did he have? What to expect from him? You hope that you get with we'll start with Alvarez. You hope you get a guy that is unafraid to throw strikes, which he is. He's a ground ball machine. He's a here-it-comes, hit-it guy. With Eovaldi, he's maybe the hardest consistent thrower as a starter in the big leagues. He throws harder than Fernandez, average fastball at times. And if he can, with Eovaldi at secondary pitches, it's slider and change. If he can develop those pitches, he'll be a really good starter. Turner, it's fastball command and just velocity. And for whatever reason, he didn't have it in spring training last year. He didn't have it first 3 quarters of the season last year. So that's the thing to watch for with him. Tom Kohler has looked really good, and I think the Marlins like him enough that if he isn't the 5th starter, he'll be in the bullpen. Brad Hand, it's fastball command too, because he has a really good changeup, but unless he can throw the fastball for strikes, all of a sudden that changeup isn't as big a weapon.
And Brad Hand has come out of their farm system, which has historically been one of the stronger farm systems in all of baseball over the last decade or so. This year it's no exception. Guys like Colin Moran, Justin Nicolino, Jake Marisnick, Andrew Heaney headline the organization. The Major League outfield of Christian Yelich, Marcell Ozuna, Giancarlo Stanton, all homegrown. Is there anybody in particular that you have seen in spring training who has caught your eye and could see time on the big league roster before season's end?
Well, I think Marisnick is one, and there's a real interesting battle going on. Ozuna hasn't hit until the last few days. If you asked anybody who knows the Marlins and has watched the Marlins who's the best defensive center field, it's without a doubt Marisnick. In fact, Marisnick is, a scout told me today, could be one of the best defensive center fielders in baseball when he gets to the big leagues and plays every day. Speed, instincts, and a great arm. The question is he ready offensively? And you don't want, because you can ruin a career or at the very least sidetrack it by putting a guy in a lineup and having him buried offensively when he's not ready. So the question is going to be with Marisnick is when is he ready offensively, because he's still young and he still has some holes. Ozuna is probably better suited for a corner position because of foot speed, and he's a great arm, so he fits in right, but you've got Stanton in right. It's a versatile outfield. Yelich is a good center fielder, and you could see Yelich in center and Ozuna in left, or Ozuna in center and Yelich in left. Or if Ozuna doesn't hit and Marisnick's not ready, you could see Yelich in center and a Reed Johnson, Brian Bogasevic type guy in left field and platoon left field. Derek Dietrich is a guy that no one talked about coming into camp, and he's done nothing but play well, and he's done 2 things well. He's hit for power, and he's been able to get on base. And those, as you know, were maybe the 2 biggest areas that the offense didn't have last year. So Dietrich's a guy that you keep your eye on him, because if things don't go right at third, he could play third. If for calls injured when the bell rings, he could be at second. He's a left-handed guy with a lot of pop, and he knows how to play the game. He was a shortstop at Georgia Tech, and his glove is good on either side of the bag, whether it's second or at third base. Those are 2 guys that I think, Marisnick and Dietrich, to keep in mind, if not for opening day, maybe May or June.
And one of the most highly discussed topics around the Marlins has been the future of Giancarlo Stanton. He just entered his first arbitration season. There have been offers from teams trying to obtain him. The Marlins have steadfastly said that they're committed to Stanton. They're not going to trade him. Stanton recently said that he wants to play out the season before deciding his future plans. Do the Marlins have the resources to sign Stanton long term? And is Stanton a player a team can build around?
those are all good questions. I don't know. I mean, I'm not privy to those conversations. I do know that, not signing a guy like that right now is not unusual across baseball. There are a lot of really good players that are entering their first year of arbitration that don't have long-term contracts. He's under club control through 16, so you've got at least 3 more years to figure it out. Now, obviously, they'd like to come to some conclusion before you get to 16. I don't know. I mean, you hope so, but you can't make a guy stay and play if he doesn't want to play here. He's a Southern California guy, but I think his attitude change this year has been a step in the right direction if you're looking for a sign, because it's night and day compared to where he was last year. So will they have the resources? Maybe. Will he want to stay here? Maybe. But I think he's learned that, and I think every player goes through this, especially when they get to their first year of arbitration. You're going to get paid, and you're going to get paid depending on what numbers you put up. So you might as well have fun and put up good numbers and get paid rather than worry about it.
Baseball's expanding instant replay to much debate. I mean, there were a couple of times over the last couple of years where umpires would blow calls. Even against the Marlins, there was that one where Gabby Sanchez hit that ball down the line in 2010. And you and Tommy went absolutely ballistic on that call that Bob Davidson made. So what is your take on instant replay, and what effect will it have on the game moving forward this season?
Well, one side note to that play, what infuriated the Marlins more than anything wasn't the fact that Bob Davidson missed the call. Was the fact that after the game he watched the replay and maintained that he got the call right. So there's that. But anyways, moving on.
Yeah.
You know what? It's going to be interesting. I think it's a step forward for the game. I think it's as with the NFL or college football or basketball. Whenever they've added instant replay, it's a work in progress. You're going to have to see how it works. I think Joe Torre and the group has set it up so that it will work quickly. The umpires on the field won't be the guys, and I think that's a big deal. When the call's overturned or affirmed, it's not the guy on the field that's doing it. So the managers can't scream and shout at the umpires because it's an umpiring crew. There's 2 umpiring crews that will be in New York in that control room that are making that call. I think it'll be a good thing. I don't think there'll be nearly as many calls challenged or once you get past the 7th overturned as you think. But there will be calls that are bang-bang plays or close plays that are worth taking a look at. And I think as they work this out, they'll work it out to the point where it's, and this is the goal, to make it quicker than the usual manager runs out on the field, asks his player, was he right or wrong, goes to the umpire, argues with the umpire for a minute and a half, goes halfway back to the dugout, then goes back to the dugout, and that's a 3-minute delay. And I think they're going to be able to review this call and get it done within a minute to a minute and a half. There is a time limit to challenge. You can't dawdle. You've got 30 seconds from the time of the call to the time that you have to challenge. And and it's not manager run out on the field and challenge. It's manager out on the step just says, I challenge. You've got 30 seconds. You don't do it in 30 seconds, you don't get the challenge. So you can't really stall or game the system the way they've got it set up. There are going to be scenarios that nobody has envisioned that they're going to have to look at and say, you know what, it's kind of like the BC. Well, I don't want to say it's kind of like the BCS because I never liked the BCS. But you know how every year they would get through it and there would be two or three things that would happen that they never envisioned that they would change for next year. That's probably the way this is going to go. They're going to make adjustments as it goes along.
Yeah, and every league's been doing that. And the NFL has done that consistently. They're talking about that with the competition committee. The final 2 questions here. First one is, we just completed the first 2 rounds of the tournament, and you called a full slate of games for CBS Sports Network. Did you fill out a bracket, and who did you have in your Final Four?
You know what? I was so busy after I finished the Mountain West tournament for CBS, I didn't do a bracket. But I saw I saw a lot of teams this year. I liked Arizona a lot. I saw them early. I saw a lot of San Diego State. I like them. I don't know that they're a Final Four team, but they're going to be a headache to play. I saw UCLA, and you could see UCLA gelling. UCLA is a really skilled team. Kyle Anderson's just an unbelievably talented point forward, a 6'8" guy that can shoot, pass, but they don't. If they get into a real half-court slugfest, they could be in trouble. But so far, they've been able to play at their own pace and their own style. I love Florida. Billy Donovan said, I had them early this year, and he said, this is not my most talented team, but this is the team that plays together the best. And so I think Florida is dangerous. I like Florida a lot, and I'd love to see the Gators get to the Final Four and get a crack at their third national championship.
Yeah, many people had Florida, Arizona in their brackets. They were top seeds. Final question, getting back to baseball. The Marlins, along with many Florida teams, they've consistently had difficulty drawing fans to games despite strong local television ratings. Is there a reason why fans down there are less inclined to attend games, and does that have to do with the weather or the plethora of entertainment options now at their disposal?
It's a question that I think every sports executive down here has at one time or another tried to answer. Whether it's the Dolphins right now, whether it was the Heat when even after Shaq left, they had trouble drawing fans until they got it together again. Obviously, the Marlins when they played in that old football stadium, and then with 2012 going haywire, and last year, that was obviously PR-wise was a really tough sell. I think this is a town with a lot of different fans from a lot of different places, and I think the fans that are here, much like other places, want a winner. They want to be entertained. So I think if you're the Marlins or the Dolphins or the Heat or the Panthers or the Hurricanes, if you're going to draw people, you better win and you better entertain. And until the Marlins are winning again, until the Dolphins are winning again, and that's going to the postseason and having success there, I don't think they're going to draw nearly as well as the Heat are right now. I think it's that simple. I mean, I think the Marlins did win, but they had a bad stadium situation, and they didn't sustain it, from 03 very long. And the Dolphins have been down a long time, so it's a tough sports market. But I think if you win, it's a great sports market, and there's probably a few other places around that you can say the same about.
Yeah, and with the Marlins, I mean, they really have a great opportunity this year. Mets, Phillies, those teams, Braves also suffering a lot of different injuries. This is really a chance for the Marlins to have a surprise season. Maybe make a run, and anything could happen in baseball, and the optimism is there. And Rich, I want to thank you for appearing on the show tonight. It's been an honor to have you on. Don't forget, if you want to follow Rich on Twitter, @Rich Waltz. The Marlins are going to take on the Colorado Rockies a week from now. Jose Fernandez on the mound against Jorge De La Rosa. You can follow me on Twitter @Gersh_MLB Talk, and you can follow us at the MLB Talk 101. We got some great content coming on. I want to thank you for coming on the show tonight.
Gersh, any time. And one thing I've always said is that while Marlin fans, and especially in this area, because we're very interactive, we have Twitter Tuesday, Email Tuesday. We do a lot of interaction with our fans, and one thing we've learned is they're not great in number in terms of attendance. They are great in spirit. The Marlin fan is a very resilient and very loyal fan, and we get emails and tweets from all over the United States and all over the world on game nights. You'd really be surprised. So we appreciate the help and support, and hopefully we don't need as much moral support as we did last year in the booth, because last year was tough. We had fun in the booth, but it wasn't easy to watch some nights. And I think this year it'll be a better season for the fish on the field.
And if you love the game of baseball, I mean, no matter what, I mean, there's always
Oh,
something special that you'll see at the ballpark. And even last year, Henderson Alvarez's no-hitter, and so many things coming up. And for more Marlins coverage, follow our partner site, Marlins Country Radio. Check them out. They do shows on Monday night, Friday night. They bring players on. You could follow them at Marlins Country, and you can follow the host of this show at Frank Conti 13. I check out their content, and for the latest in Major League Baseball, follow the MLB Talk 101. We also have a website, www.mlbtalk101.com.